After dedicating his entire life to saving others, Battalion Chief Michael Reynolds finally hung up his helmet. But just weeks into his hard-earned retirement, the worst fire in the city's history erupted, consuming entire blocks downtown. As young firefighters found themselves trapped and dying, his former rookie, now a captain, fell to his knees on Michael's doorstep, begging him to return one last time. Would the 50-year-old veteran answer the most desperate call of his career when hundreds of lives hung in the balance? For 35 years, Michael Reynolds had been the backbone of Westlake Fire Department. His career spanned generations, from rookie firefighter to respected battalion chief. The department threw him a celebration that brought tears to the eyes of even the toughest veterans. Testimonials from those he'd saved over the decades echoed through the packed firehouse. A mother clutching the hand of her teenage daughter, a girl Michael had pulled from a burning apartment when she was just 4 years old. "You gave me the chance to watch my little girl grow up," the woman said, voice breaking. "There's no thanking someone for that kind of gift." A parade of handshakes from younger firefighters he'd mentored followed. Captain Jason Torres, now 30, once his rookie 8 years ago, presented him with a hand-carved wooden helmet. A symbol of protection now returned to its giver. "You taught me everything I know, Chief," Torres said. "The department won't be the same without you." The ceremonial last ride on Engine 7, his home for most of his career, wound through the streets of Westlake. Children waved, seniors saluted, and Michael fought back tears as he realized how deeply intertwined his identity had become with the job. Michael's retirement plans were simple: fishing at Cedar Lake, woodworking in his garage, and making up for lost time with his wife Eleanor, who had supported him through countless sleepless nights and missed holidays. For their 25th anniversary, just weeks away, he planned to surprise her with a trip to Alaska, something she'd always dreamed of but they'd never had time for. His grown children, a daughter following his footsteps as a paramedic and a son teaching high school, gifted him a handcrafted rocking chair for the porch. "So you can finally sit still for 5 minutes, Dad?" his daughter teased. The chair represented the peaceful days ahead, time to breathe, reflect, and rest. The department had changed drastically over recent years. Budget cuts had reduced staffing levels below national standards. The city council repeatedly delayed equipment upgrades despite Michael's passionate testimony. His replacement, Battalion Chief Thomas Park, was technically competent but lacked Michael's instinctive understanding of fire behavior and building construction, knowledge that came only from years of frontline experience. "The department will be fine," Michael assured himself during his final walk through the station. But as he handed over his radio and command keys to Park, an unsettling feeling nagged at him. Park was only 38, with most of his experience in administrative roles rather than frontline firefighting. Still, Michael was determined to release his grip on the job that had defined him for so long. "Time to let someone else carry the weight," he said, patting Park on the shoulder. "You call if you need anything." Park had nodded confidently. "Enjoy retirement, Chief. We've got this." Just 23 days into retirement, Michael woke at dawn to the acrid smell of smoke. From his bedroom window, he saw an ominous dark plume rising over downtown. Eleanor found him in the kitchen, already dressed. Staring at the old scanner, he couldn't bring himself to pack away. "I'm just curious," he assured her as he turned up the volume. But the rapid-fire communications told a story that made his stomach tighten. A construction accident had ignited a fire that had quickly spread to the historic district, with its century-old wooden structures packed tightly together. "All units respond. We have fire showing from multiple buildings on Main and Jefferson. Initiating second alarm." Chief Park's voice sounded controlled but strained. The situation had all the ingredients of a firefighter's worst nightmare. The fire had started in the early morning at a renovation project in the old Hartman building, a structure Michael knew intimately, having fought 3 separate fires there over his career. A perfect storm of circumstances allowed it to grow undetected. Faulty temporary wiring had smoldered unnoticed for hours within the walls. By the time workers arrived and opened the doors, introducing fresh oxygen, the fire exploded through the building. High winds from an incoming weather system unseasonably dry conditions after weeks without rain, and inadequate water pressure from aging downtown infrastructure created conditions for potential disaster. The historic district, with its shared walls and hidden void spaces, was essentially one large connected structure. Exactly the scenario Michael had warned about in his final budget presentation to the city council. Chief Park deployed all available units, but the department was stretched dangerously thin. 3 senior captains were on vacation. 2 engines were out of service for maintenance that had been repeatedly postponed due to budget constraints. The mutual aid agreements with neighboring towns were activated, but help would take precious time to arrive. Michael paced in his living room, mapping the fire's likely spread patterns in his mind. The scanner revealed miscommunications, confusion about building layouts, and increasingly frantic calls for additional resources. Eleanor watched him with knowing eyes. "You're going down there, aren't you?" she asked. Michael shook his head firmly. "Not my department anymore. They have a chain of command." But his body betrayed him. He kept glancing at the closet where his personal turnout gear still hung. When Eleanor brought him coffee, he didn't even notice, his mind completely absorbed in the unfolding crisis. A breaking news alert flashed on the television. Dramatic aerial footage showed flames leaping between buildings. The reporter's voice was grave. "Sources tell us this could become the worst fire in Westlake's history. Authorities are beginning evacuations of the hospital 3 blocks from the fire line." Michael turned up the scanner just as a chilling message came through. "Command, this is Engine 3. We're trapped on the 3rd floor of the Lambert building. Fires cut off both stairwells. We have 4 firefighters and 2 civilians. Running low on air." Michael froze. The Lambert building. 5 stories of death trap, with only one workable exit route that wouldn't appear on any floor plan. He knew because he'd discovered it himself during a warehouse fire there in 2007. Chief Park's response came seconds later. "Engine 3, stand by. We're sending Rescue 1 to your location." But Michael could hear the uncertainty. Park didn't know about the hidden access point through the adjacent building's ventilation system. Michael reached for his keys, but Eleanor placed her hand over his. "You told me you were done running into burning buildings," she said softly. "I'm just going to watch," he replied. "Maybe make a call, give them some information about the buildings." Eleanor didn't believe him for a second, but she grabbed his old department jacket from the closet. "At least take this," she said. "And Michael, come back to me." By the time Michael parked 6 blocks from the fire scene, as close as police barricades would allow, the situation had deteriorated dramatically. The flame front had expanded to encompass nearly a full city block, with spot fires developing on adjacent structures. Black, oily smoke billowed thousands of feet into the air, visible from miles away. Michael flashed his retired department ID to pass through police lines. The scene that greeted him was pure chaos. Firefighters dragging hoses through debris-strewn streets, paramedics treating smoke inhalation victims, police struggling to maintain evacuation perimeters. The command post, a hastily established tent near a park, was surrounded by exhausted firefighters rotating out for air cylinder changes. Michael scanned faces, recognizing most despite their soot-covered features. Many nodded respectfully as they spotted him, but nobody questioned his presence. In the midst of crisis, an experienced hand was always welcome. Inside the command tent, Chief Park hunched over building plans spread across a makeshift table. His normally immaculate uniform was stained with smoke and sweat. When he glanced up and saw Michael, relief flashed briefly across his face before pride reasserted itself. "Chief Reynolds came to see the show." Park attempted a casual tone that failed to mask his stress. "Just thought I might know something about these old buildings that could help," Michael replied, keeping his distance from the command table, respectful of the chain of command. Park nodded tersely and returned to the tactical discussion with his command staff. Michael listened quietly, identifying critical gaps in their understanding of the downtown structures. As the meeting broke up and officers returned to their assignments, Park finally approached Michael. "We've got a handle on it," Park insisted, though the radio traffic and his own exhausted expression told a different story. Michael kept his tone neutral. "The Lambert building, You've got people trapped inside? Rescue 1 is working on it. They've been in for 20 minutes with no contact. There's an access point through the old ventilation system in the merchant exchange next door, Michael said carefully. It's not on any plans. I found it during the warehouse fire in '07. Park's expression hardened. Why wasn't this documented? It was. In my supplemental reports. They should be in the archive. A radio crackled with urgency. Command, Rescue 1. We can't reach the 3rd floor. Fire conditions worsening. Request permission to withdraw and attempt alternative approach. The screech of metal giving way carried through the radio transmission. Park's face paled as he grabbed the radio. Rescue 1, this is command. Stand by. He turned to Michael, professional pride warring with the lives at stake. Tell me about this access point. As Michael began explaining, a tremendous crash shook the ground. Through the command tent's open flap, they saw a partial collapse of the Lambert building's eastern wall. Screams and shouts erupted as debris rained down on the staging area. All units, emergency evacuation, Lambert building. Park shouted into the radio. I repeat, all personnel evacuate immediately. In the horrible silence that followed, the radio remained ominously quiet. No acknowledgement from Rescue 1. No updates from Engine 3. 4 firefighters and 2 civilians potentially lost. Park's hands trembled slightly as he set down the radio. The command staff exchanged grim looks. They all knew what those missing voices likely meant. A deputy chief approached with updated weather reports. Wind shifting in 30 minutes. If it does, we lose everything east of Madison Avenue. Madison Avenue, where the city's hospital stood, currently treating dozens of smoke inhalation victims and unable to evacuate its intensive care patients. The evacuation orders expanded by the hour. The local news showed footage of exhausted firefighters, some barely out of training, struggling to establish fire lines that the blaze repeatedly breached. Equipment failures mounted as older pumpers and ladders were pushed beyond their capabilities. Park's voice on the scanner revealed mounting stress as he tried to coordinate the chaotic response. Mutual aid companies arriving from neighboring towns reported to staging areas with incompatible equipment. The city's water system began showing pressure drops as multiple master streams pulled thousands of gallons per minute. As the afternoon wore on, the situation reached critical mass. 2 more firefighters called Mayday after a floor collapsed in the Franklin building. A backdraft explosion blew out windows across half a block, injuring 3 police officers maintaining the evacuation perimeter. The fire jumped Madison Avenue, the last defensive line before the hospital. Park retreated to a quiet corner of the command tent, away from his staff's eyes. Michael saw something he recognized all too well, the weight of command crushing a good man who realized he was out of his depth, with lives hanging in the balance. Michael approached carefully. Thomas, he said, using Park's first name for the first time in years. I know what you're feeling right now. Park shook his head. You don't understand. Those were my decisions. Those are my people in there. I understand better than anyone, Michael replied quietly. Remember the Westridge Mall fire? I lost 2 firefighters that day. Carried that weight every day since. How did you keep going? By focusing on the people I could still save. Before Park could respond, a deputy chief rushed in with urgent news. The situation on Madison Avenue is deteriorating rapidly. I think we need to consider evacuating the hospital completely. Park's face fell. That's hundreds of patients, including critical care. We need more time. Michael excused himself, stepping outside to clear his head and assess the situation from a different perspective. He needed to see the fire lines for himself before making any recommendations. As he walked toward the main staging area to get a better view of the burning buildings, he was struck by the magnitude of the disaster unfolding before him. As Michael approached the main fire line, he paused to absorb the full scope of the disaster. The heat was intense even from this distance, the roar of the flames drowning out shouted commands between firefighters. Fire Engine 7 was parked on the main street, its ladder extended toward a building engulfed in flames. As he studied the tactical situation, 30-year-old Captain Jason Torres spotted him through the smoke. Torres, covered in soot and showing clear signs of exhaustion, immediately abandoned the team he was directing and rushed toward his former mentor. Chief Reynolds, Torres shouted over the roar of the flames and sirens, disbelief and hope mingling in his voice. Michael hadn't expected to be recognized so quickly. Torres, how bad is it out here? It's hell, Chief. We've lost control. There are firefighters trapped in the Lambert building, and the hospital is in the fire's path. The desperation was palpable in his voice. Park is overwhelmed. Nobody knows these buildings like you do. Michael looked toward the fire, feeling the heat even at that distance. I'm a civilian now, Jason. I can't intervene. At that moment, exactly as shown in the thumbnail, Torres dropped to one knee in the middle of the street, with the fire truck clearly visible behind him. With hands raised in a pleading gesture and his face marked by soot and sweat, he implored, I'm begging you, Chief Reynolds. Please come back. Only you can help us now. There are lives at stake. Williams has a newborn daughter he'll never meet if we don't do something. The image was dramatic and powerful. A young firefighter kneeling in the street, begging his mentor to return, while the city burned behind them. Several bystanders and other firefighters stopped to witness the moment. Michael stood motionless, resolution fighting against the sense of duty that had defined his entire life. He looked at Torres, then at the fire, and finally at the expectant faces of the younger firefighters who had gathered around, all waiting for his decision. I understand your situation, Michael finally responded, his resolution giving way to duty. Get up, Torres. Torres remained kneeling. I won't get up until you agree to help us, Chief. I'm begging you. Michael reached out and lifted Torres by the shoulder. You don't need to kneel. I've never turned my back on this city, and I'm not about to start now. Relief flooded Torres's face as he stood up. Thank you, Chief. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Michael warned, removing his casual jacket to reveal a t-shirt underneath. I need equipment and a full report on the situation. And let's be clear, I'm here as a civilian advisor. Chief Park is still in command. Torres nodded quickly. There's extra gear on Engine 7, and the command post is set up in the park 2 blocks from here. As Michael walked with Torres toward the engine to get equipped, several veteran firefighters noticed his presence. News spread quickly, and a murmur of renewed hope moved through the ranks of exhausted firefighters. Reynolds is back, the news traveled. The chief is back. Minutes later, dressed in borrowed protective gear over his civilian clothes, Michael entered the command post where Chief Park was coordinating efforts with increasing desperation. Park looked up from plans spread across an improvised table. Surprise, relief, and a flash of wounded pride crossed his face at the sight of Michael. Reynolds, Park said with a strained voice. Torres brought you in. I'm here to help, Michael said simply. Torres tells me there are firefighters trapped in the Lambert building. Park nodded grimly. Rescue 1 is gone. We've lost contact completely. Engine 3 has maybe 15 minutes of air left. I know a way in, Michael replied, stepping toward the tactical map. There's a maintenance tunnel connecting to the merchant exchange basement that could give us access. Michael accepted the handshake but deflected the attention. It's the work of all these firefighters that's making the difference. I just provided some local knowledge. The mayor smiled, shaking his head. Mr. Reynolds' modesty is admirable, but the facts speak for themselves. When young Torres knelt before you in the middle of the street, begging you to return, that moment might have been the turning point between tragedy and hope for this city. As Michael prepared to lead the rescue team, Park pulled him aside. I need to know something, he said urgently. If we get those people out, what next? This fire is still growing beyond our control. Michael studied the tactical maps, his mind racing through decades of experience. There's one chance, he said finally, but it means using the old subway tunnels under 3rd Street as a firebreak. Those were sealed decades ago, Park objected. Not completely. I inspected them after the earthquake retrofit in 2012. The city never funded the complete sealing work. Michael traced a line on the map. If we can get ahead of the fire front and vent through these access points, we might be able to create a vacuum effect that pulls the fire away from the hospital. That's an incredible risk. So is doing nothing. Before Park could respond, Torres returned with 4 firefighters in fresh gear. Michael quickly outlined the rescue plan using his knowledge of the hidden access point. As he strapped on borrowed breathing apparatus, he felt both the familiar weight of the equipment and the unfamiliar stiffness in his joints, a sharp reminder of the years that had passed. "Let's bring our people home," he said, leading the team out of the command tent and toward a building that seemed determined to become their tomb. Michael led the rescue team through the merchant exchange basement with unerring confidence, navigating by memory through areas where visibility dropped to 0. The hidden access tunnel, concealed behind what appeared to be a solid brick wall, revealed itself under Michael's knowing hands. A forgotten maintenance panel swung open into a narrow passage. "Single file," Michael ordered. "Torres, you're right behind me. Everyone maintain physical contact with the person ahead of you." The passage was barely wide enough for a man in full turnout gear. Decades of dust and cobwebs clung to their helmets and shoulders as they pushed forward. Michael's muscles protested. Retirement had quickly softened him, but adrenaline and determination pushed him onward. They emerged into the service elevator shaft. Michael directed his flashlight upward, revealing the charred remains of the elevator car stuck between floors. "The shaft vents to each floor," he explained. "We climb the maintenance ladder to level 3. As they ascended, the heat intensified dramatically. At the 3rd floor access hatch, Michael paused. "It's going to be hot. Stay low, follow the right wall." According to building plans, Engine 3 would have been operating in the northwest quadrant. He pushed through the hatch into hell. The 3rd floor was a maze of active fire and rolling smoke banks. Following instincts honed over decades, Michael led them through a path where the thermal layers were slightly less intense. "Engine 3, he called through his mask. "Sound off if you can hear me." After an agonizing minute of searching, a weak past device alarm, the motion-sensing safety alert worn by every firefighter, guided them to a collapsed section of hallway. Beyond the debris, they found the Engine 3 crew and 2 civilians huddled in a relatively smoke-free corner, their air supplies nearly exhausted. "Reynolds!" Lieutenant Williams croaked in disbelief when he recognized Michael. "They sent a retiree to save us?" "I volunteered," Michael replied, quickly assessing their condition. 2 firefighters could walk, 1 had a leg injury, and 1 was unconscious from smoke inhalation. Both civilians were ambulatory but terrified. Torres, oxygen exchange for Williams and Chun. Johnson and Perez, help with Ramirez, leg looks broken. I'll take point with Rivera on the unconscious firefighter. The rescue operation transformed Michael. Gone was any hesitation or sense of being an outsider. He commanded the scene with absolute authority born of experience, his directions precise and unquestionable. Even Torres, normally gregarious, fell into silent obedience, recognizing a master at work. The return journey was harrowing. Twice they had to detour as sections of ceiling collapsed behind them. The service shaft had deteriorated further, with flames now visible through cracks in the walls. Michael calculated oxygen consumption rates in his head, shifting spare bottles between team members to ensure nobody ran out. When they finally emerged from the merchant exchange basement, a cheer erupted from the staging area. Paramedics rushed forward to take the injured. Michael pulled off his mask, gulping fresh air as he watched the rescued firefighters transferred to waiting ambulances. Torres collapsed to his knees beside him, exhaustion finally claiming its toll. "You did it, Chief," he gasped. Michael helped him up. "We did it. Now let's get back to command." When Michael returned to the command tent, the atmosphere had completely transformed. His successful rescue had electrified the operation. Chief Park approached with open admiration, professional jealousy set aside in the face of Michael's achievement. "They're all going to make it," Park reported. "Even Rivera. The doctors say another 15 minutes and we would have lost him." Michael nodded, too exhausted for celebration. "The fire's still burning. What's the latest?" Park guided him to the tactical map, now crowded with new information. It's jumped Madison. Hospital evacuation is underway, but critical patients can't be moved. We're running out of options. The subway tunnel plan? I have teams standing by, but the access points haven't been opened in decades. We don't even know if they'll budge. Michael studied the map, his mind racing. There's a maintenance key in the old station office on 5th Street. Original brass set from when the system was built. Should open every access point in the network. Park shook his head in amazement. How do you even know these things? When you've been fighting fires in the same city for 35 years, you collect information. You never know when some obscure detail will save lives. Michael straightened, decision made. I'll lead the tunnel team. Michael, you've already done enough? With respect, Chief Park, no one else knows those tunnels like I do. I helped map them during the retrofit project. Michael's tone brooked no argument. You handle operations up here. I need 6 firefighters with demolition equipment and all the Class A foam we can transport. As Michael assembled his team, Eleanor appeared again at his side, this time with a thermos of water and energy bars. I heard about the rescue, she said, her eyes bright with pride despite her fear. The whole city's talking about it. Michael drank deeply, suddenly aware of his parched throat. We're not done yet. Eleanor squeezed his arm. I know. Just remember you promised me Alaska for our anniversary. Michael managed a tired smile. I haven't forgotten. Minutes later, Michael led his special operations team toward the old subway entrance, each member loaded with equipment. Behind them, the downtown continued to burn, but for the first time since the crisis began, there was a sense of possibility, of fighting back rather than just containing loss. The abandoned subway entrance on 5th Street had been sealed and forgotten by most of Westlake's residents. A nondescript utility door, painted to match the surrounding brick, concealed the stairs down to a system that had operated for less than a decade before budget issues shut it down in the 1970s. The brass key, exactly where Michael remembered in the dusty station office, turned with surprising ease in the ancient lock. As the heavy door groaned open, Michael led his team down crumbling concrete stairs into darkness. Watch your footing, he warned. Some of these sections haven't been inspected in 40 years. The tunnels were a time capsule, faded advertisements still visible on tiled walls, rusted tracks disappearing into blackness. But Michael moved with purpose, navigating the labyrinth with uncanny precision. The main ventilation shaft is a quarter-mile ahead, he explained as they walked. It runs directly under the worst of the fire zone. If we can create controlled venting points, the natural chimney effect should draw the fire's energy downward and away from the hospital. One of the younger firefighters, Rodriguez, voiced the concern all were thinking. Chief, if we vent wrong, couldn't we just give the fire new oxygen and make it worse? Absolutely, Michael confirmed. That's why timing and placement are critical. This isn't in any textbook, Rodriguez. We're improvising with the city's life at stake. They reached the main shaft junction, a cavernous space where 4 tunnel sections converged beneath a central ventilation column that rose all the way to street level. Michael directed the placement of demolition equipment at specific points around the shaft base. We need controlled breaches, not too large, not too small, he instructed. Then we'll use the Class A foam to create a barrier that allows smoke ventilation but inhibits flashover. As his team prepared the charges, Michael maintained constant radio contact with Park above ground. The fire was now threatening the hospital's east wing. Patients were being consolidated in the west wing, but complete evacuation remained impossible for the most critical cases. We're ready, Michael reported eventually. I need all ground crews to pull back 50 yards from these coordinates. He listed the exact street locations above their breach points. When we initiate, there's going to be a significant oxygen drawdown. Anyone too close could be affected by smoke or even pulled toward the vents. Understood, Park replied. Ground units are repositioning. After a pause, he added, Michael, are you sure about this? The structural engineers say parts of that tunnel system could be compromised. Michael looked at his team, brave men and women trusting him with their lives based on a theory developed on the fly. No, he admitted. I'm not sure, but I'm certain about what happens if we do nothing. All units have confirmed repositioning, Park reported moments later. Michael gathered his team for final instructions. Once we initiate, we'll have approximately 3 minutes to apply the foam pattern before the ventilation effect fully establishes. Any longer in the shaft after that, and the heat transfer could become deadly. He looked each firefighter in the eye. Anyone wants to go back up, now's the time. No shame in it. No one moved. Then let's save our city. The controlled demolition charges created precisely calibrated openings in the tunnel ceiling, just enough to establish ventilation without compromising structural integrity. Immediately, they could feel the air movement intensify, drawing downward from the inferno above. Michael led the foam application teams with meticulous attention to detail. The special Class A foam, designed to break the fire triangle by simultaneously cooling, isolating fuel, and displacing oxygen, created a carefully engineered pattern around each vent point. As the final foam lines were set, Michael checked his watch. 2 minutes 40. Time to evacuate. They retreated down the main tunnel as the ventilation effect strengthened dramatically. Michael took up the rear position, ensuring everyone moved ahead of him. The airflow became a powerful current, carrying heat and smoke particles that stung their eyes even through protective equipment. Rodriguez stumbled on the uneven track, his equipment pack slipping from his shoulder. As he turned to retrieve it, a section of tunnel ceiling cracked ominously. Michael reacted instantly, diving forward to shove Rodriguez clear as chunks of concrete crashed down. Pain exploded through Michael's left leg as a section of debris pinned him to the tunnel floor. "Chief!" Rodriguez scrambled back, joined by 2 others who immediately began clearing the debris. "Get out!" Michael ordered through gritted teeth. "Tunnel's compromising." "That's an order." "Not without you, Chief," Rodriguez insisted as they worked to free his leg. The temperature in the tunnel was rising rapidly as the ventilation effect pulled superheated air and gases downward. Michael's tactical gamble was working. The fire was being drawn away from the hospital, but the ancient tunnel structure wasn't handling the stress as well as he'd hoped. With a final heave, they freed his leg. Michael couldn't put weight on it, but with Rodriguez and Peterson supporting him on either side, they continued their retreat. Behind them, more sections of ceiling began to give way as the tunnels groaned under unprecedented thermal stress. They reached the exit stairs just as a thunderous rumble signaled a major collapse somewhere in the tunnel system. The team practically carried Michael up the stairs and out into the night air, where a waiting ambulance crew immediately took charge of him. "Command, this is Reynolds," Michael radioed, waving off the paramedics trying to administer oxygen. "Tunnel ventilation system established. Team is clear, but the tunnels have suffered significant structural collapse." "Copy that," Park replied, an unusual emotion in his voice. "Michael, it's working. The fire front is shifting away from the hospital. Aerial units are reporting a visible redirection of the convection column." As paramedics finally convinced Michael to lie on a gurney, he closed his eyes briefly, allowing exhaustion to wash over him. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, they were fighting on something approaching equal terms. A young paramedic leaned over him. "Chief Reynolds? I need to check your vitals and start in 4. Michael opened his eyes, recognizing the young woman attending him. "Sarah Williams," he said. "Your father was on engine 3. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, sir, he's being treated at County." Her voice cracked slightly. "They told us you went in personally to get them out, that you came out of retirement to save him." "Just doing what needed to be done," Michael replied, suddenly uncomfortable with the attention. "My dad says different," she insisted as she efficiently started in 4. "He says you're the reason I still have a father." By midnight, Michael had refused hospital transport, instead directing paramedics to establish a treatment area where he could remain near the command post. His fractured leg was splinted and his smoke exposure treated, but he insisted on staying involved in the operation. From a folding chair outside the command tent, Michael continued advising Park as the battle against the fire entered its critical phase. The subway ventilation strategy had created a firebreak that held along 3rd Street. The hospital remained secure. Mutual aid resources had finally arrived in force from across the state. Park emerged from the command tent, face streaked with soot but bearing the first genuine smile since the crisis began. "Latest aerial survey confirms it," he reported to Michael. "The fire's contained on 3 sides. We're going to make it." Michael nodded, relief washing over him. "The downtown's going to look different, but we saved what matters." "No small thanks to you." Park settled into a chair beside him. "I've been thinking about what happened today. How one man made the difference between disaster and salvation." "It wasn't one man," Michael corrected. "It was every firefighter out there. I just provided some institutional knowledge." Park shook his head. "It was more than knowledge. It was leadership, experience, instinct." He stared at the glowing horizon. "Things that can't be learned from manuals or training scenarios." A procession of firefighters began approaching Michael's position. First came Torres and his crew, followed by members of other companies, then mutual aid firefighters from neighboring towns. Without formal coordination, they formed a line to shake his hand, thank him, or simply nod in profound respect. The impromptu ceremony culminated when a young firefighter approached tentatively. "Chief Reynolds? I'm Kevin Chin. You pulled me out of the Lambert building today." Michael recognized him as one of the trapped Engine 3 firefighters. "Good to see you on your feet, Chin. The doctors said if we'd been in there even 10 more minutes." Chun trailed off, emotion overtaking him. "Sir, my wife is expecting our first child next month. Because of you, that kid's going to have a father." He extended his hand, which trembled slightly. "There's no way to thank someone for that." Michael took the young man's hand, reminded powerfully of the mother and daughter at his retirement party who had expressed similar sentiments. The cycle of saving and being saved, the fundamental purpose that had driven his career, suddenly felt vibrantly present rather than a fading memory. As dawn broke over Westlake, the fire was officially declared contained. The devastation was extensive, nearly 6 blocks of the historic district destroyed or severely damaged. But remarkably, thanks largely to Michael's interventions, no lives had been lost. The injured would recover. The city would rebuild. Eleanor arrived with fresh clothes and Michael's prescription medications. She found him still at the command post, working with Park on the transition to recovery operations. 35 years of retirement lasted exactly 3 weeks, she observed with a mixture of exasperation and pride. Michael looked up, suddenly aware of how disheveled and exhausted he must appear. "Eleanor, don't apologize," she interrupted. "I married a firefighter. I knew what I was getting into." She helped him stand, mindful of his injured leg. "But now you're coming home to rest. Doctor's orders. And wife's orders trump everything." Park approached as Michael prepared to leave. "The mayor's called an emergency council session for tomorrow. They want you there." "What for?" Michael asked, suspicious. "Something about a special position they're creating. Emergency Services Advisor, I think they're calling it." Park smiled knowingly. Apparently, they've realized that some experience is too valuable to lose. 1 week later, Michael sat in his rocking chair on the porch, his splinted leg propped on a cushioned stool. The local newspaper lay folded beside him, its headlines celebrating the retired chief who saved downtown. He declined most interview requests, uncomfortable with the attention. The sound of a vehicle approaching drew his eyes to the driveway. Chief Park's department SUV pulled up, followed by a procession of personal vehicles, Torres, Rodriguez, and several other firefighters he'd led during the crisis. "We're not disturbing you, are we?" Park asked as they gathered on the porch. "Just contemplating retirement," Michael replied with a wry smile. "Again." "About that," Park said, suddenly formal. "The mayor and city council have unanimously voted to create a new position, Emergency Services Advisor. They want someone with deep knowledge of the city's infrastructure and emergency procedures to train personnel and consult on major incidents." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a desk job." It's whatever you want it to be, Park replied. Part-time, flexible hours. No running into burning buildings unless absolutely necessary. He exchanged glances with Torres. The department needs your experience, Michael. Not just for emergencies, but to pass it on to the next generation. Torres stepped forward, recovered from his injuries but still bearing a small scar above his right eyebrow. A memento from the downtown fire. No one's ever going to forget what you did, Chief. How you came back when we needed you most. Michael looked at the faces of the firefighters gathered on his porch, men and women he'd trained, led, and now saved. The pride in their eyes made his throat tighten. Eleanor appeared in the doorway with a tray of lemonade. I heard the job offer from the kitchen, she said, setting down the drinks. Just so you know, I've already packed for Alaska. Our flight leaves next Wednesday, so whatever you decide, you're still taking me. Michael laughed. Yes, ma'am. As the firefighters enjoyed Eleanor's lemonade and shared stories on the porch, Michael found himself studying the downtown skyline visible in the distance. The scars of the fire were evident, gaps where historic buildings had once stood. But the hospital remained. The people remained. Life continued. Park moved to sit beside Michael. So, what do you think about the offer? Michael watched a fire engine roar down a distant street, lights flashing. The sound of its siren, a call he'd answered thousands of times over 35 years, still quickened his pulse. Some calls, Michael said quietly, you just can't ignore, even in retirement. The two men watched the engine disappear around a corner, understanding passing between them. There would always be fires to fight, lives to save. But now Michael had found a way to balance the call of duty with the peace he'd earned, passing on 3 decades of wisdom while keeping his promise to Eleanor. In the distance, the city continued to rebuild, stronger and safer than before. Hashtag a firefighter retired after 35 years. Weeks later, the city begged him to return as flames engulfed downtown.